Now, there is a date that's very familiar to us, September the 11th. When we think of September the 11th, we think of September the 11th, 2001. It was on September the 11th, 2001, those planes ran into the Twin Towers of the Trade Center, and they came down. And so the date, September the 11th, is now embedded in our minds and our memories as a day of disaster and mourning. But the day was already famous as a day of either mourning or celebration, depending on which side you were on. On September the 11th, 1973, the president of Chile, Salvador Allende, the leader of the Socialist Party and of a social revolution that had taken place between 1970 and 1973, Salvador Allende was overthrown and killed. In fact, the leader of the army, the Minister of Defense of Chile, Augusto Pinochet, had conducted a military coup, had taken the army, turned it against the existing government, and overthrown it. And in fact, that was to lead to a series of events that became a cause célèbre all over the world. The world in the 1970s was consumed by Chile. And what had happened? Thousands and thousands of refugees poured out of Chile. Many of them came to the United States of America. Many of them went to other Latin American countries. Many of them went to Europe. Close to 40,000 people were arrested by the new military government, interrogated. Some of them were imprisoned, and over 3,000 of them were killed. Many of them were young people who were accused of being devotees and followers, ardent followers of Salvador Allende. The brutality of the regime, the repressive nature of the regime, the numbers of the refugees, and the fact that they created an agency that would reach out to the refugee population to kill prominent members of the Allende regime. They even reached out to Washington, D.C. Letelier, who was one of the important officials of the Allende government, was assassinated in Washington, D.C. So, for those people who thought that Salvador Allende was a dangerous commie, then it was, September the 11th, was a day of celebration. I mean, it was great. In fact, Pinochet in Chile turned it into a national holiday. September the 11th was a national holiday. It was the day to celebrate the overthrow of the communist government. For those people who hated Pinochet, who thought he was a horrible dictator, this was a day of mourning. September the 11th, and this is before 2001. This was back in the 1970s, and for people who certainly were Chilean, that date remained always. It was a day of horror. It was a day when a regime that had been democratically elected, according to them, was illegally removed from power, and in which over 3,000 people were massacred. Now, that Pinochet controversy was dramatized in 1998 and 1999 and 2000. Pinochet was repudiated at the polls in a plebiscite that he had arranged and not planned to lose in 1988. But he had made provision for his future. The new president of Chile, who was a figure in the center and not on the right, President Allende, had to keep Pinochet as his commander-in-chief for the army. And he remained in charge of the army even after he lost the presidency until 1998, when reaching 82, he decided to call it quits. And he simply resigned and he went traveling. He went to England. And you may remember the incident. While in Great Britain, there were people who applied to the British courts citing international law, saying that Pinochet was not only a criminal in Chile, he was an international criminal. He had committed crimes against humanity, and there were provisions in British law to punish criminals that had committed crimes against humanity. It would be as though if Adolf Hitler had fled to Paraguay, and Paraguay had a law saying people who commit crimes against humanity in their own country or in their own area can be arrested by us and tried by our courts. It's a whole new idea. So he was arrested. Pinochet, the great dictator of Chile, now finds himself a prisoner in England. He can't go home. He just went for a vacation. Beware. No. He just went for a vacation. He ends up in the British prison for 16 months while the British courts argue as to whether he should be released. He is released by Tony Blair, which of course angers many people in the Labour Party. I mean, Tony Blair is theoretically a socialist. I mean, he's the leader of the Labour Party in Britain, and he now releases Pinochet because pressure has been applied on him, certainly from the United States of America, which had a hand in the coup that overthrew Salvador Allende. And Pinochet returns to Chile, where now they're still trying, to put him on trial in Chile. So this cause célèbre, this coup that took place on September the 11th, 1973, remains very much in the paper, and every so often in the New York Times I'll open up the paper and there's a full featured article on what they're trying to do about Pinochet or what's happening in Chile. But what is very disturbing to many people who hate Pinochet, the hatred is very intense. I must tell you, if you read the liberal press, then one of the villains, do you understand? One of the great international villains of the liberal press has been Pinochet. Part of the problem is that in Chile today, the country that he transformed by his coup has the fastest growing economy in Latin America. Argentina's going down the tubes. Uruguay's almost going down the tubes, all right? Bolivia is halfway down the tubes. Peru is sliding down the tubes, all right? Colombia is totally engrossed in this internal civil war, drug war, the whole thing. Venezuela, I mean, there's like a civil war between the president and the middle class, the whole thing. Brazil is one of the countries going up, but it's not growing as fast as Chile. When Salvador Allende took over Chile, it was going down the tubes. And in fact, during his presidency, the economy, the conditions of the economy were aggravated. It was one of the reasons for the coup against him. And then Pinochet came in, and he got his Chicago boys. What's a Chicago boy? Well, a Chicago boy is a boy or a man or a woman who went to the University of Chicago and studied in the economics department there. And the man, the leading guru of that department, was a short little man, but I mean, he was a great advisor to Ronald Reagan, whatever. His name is Milton Friedman, the great advisor of the free economy. Get the government out of the economy, and then it will breathe, and then it will grow. So, I mean, while they're chasing Pinochet now, who is not exactly clear who he is, no, I mean, he claims he doesn't know. Other people say he's still very savvy, he's just trying to get out of being tried in the court. While all of that's happening, all of us are eating Chilean fish, buying Chilean fruit, and drinking Chilean wine every time we go to the restaurant. It's a booming, got it? It's a booming economy. What was expected was that this dictatorship would produce a disaster to match the political disaster of the military coup. So what happened? Got it. That's the theme of this morning, so that you can understand. I mean, history refuses to fall into the narrow categories that we create for it. Do you understand? And sometimes we end up with what we call absurd combinations. Whatever happened on September the 11th, 1973, the economy of Chile took a turn that has now made it the fastest growing economy in Latin America. So fast that the United States of America has invited Chile to become part of the North American Free Trade Agreement. It's Canada and Mexico. Mexico is problematic. But Chile, the United States wants Chile. So the only country in South America invited to be part of that system. So what happened? In order to do that, I have to describe Chile. Chile is the fluorine mark of countries. It's people, it's the thinnest, it's the thinnest country, it's the thinnest country. I mean, it can't even gain weight because the Andes Mountains are in the way. So if you want to gain weight, you can't even gain weight because you've got these terrible mountains on the east. It's the thin. There is no country as thin. Even Princess Radziwill, the sister of Jackie Kennedy, would approve. So she said, you can't be, never too thin, never too thin. Too thin or too rich. Okay, fine. So there is Chile. I mean, it's over 1,000 miles from the north from the top to the bottom. Do you understand? Its territorial size, however, is only about 300,000 square miles. It's a little bit larger than the state of Texas. I mean, the state of Texas from north to south is much shorter. It's squatter. This is thin, elegant, thin. And Chile exists between the Andes Mountains, which are new and very high, certainly where Chile is. Right? If you're a skier, you'll love it, okay? and there's just a little bit of land, and there's the Pacific Ocean. Got it? I mean, people say, if you go north and south in Chile, you travel. If you go east and west, you stroll, because you're across, you're across the border. You're across the border before you know it. And in fact, the range of latitudes up in the north, it's north of the Tropic of Capricorn, which is, it's in the tropics. And at the south, it's almost touching Antarctica. Now, this thin country is divided up into regions because there are so many different climatic conditions given its length. In the north, and I do want to tell you about the mountains, there are the Andes as a back. And then there are coastal mountains. So there, I mean, Chile is overwhelmingly mountainous. There's a coastal range, and then what? There's a backbone, which is the Andes. And then in between the coastal range and the Andes are to be found valleys. If there were no valleys, do you understand? It would be very difficult to live in this place. So in the very north, it's desert, dry desert. In fact, there are parts of that desert, the Atacama, there are parts of that desert that are so dry, there's no rain. I mean, just water never appears. It's like Arizona, every so often there's a little rush and it goes down, and it goes away. Southern California. No, it's just terrible desert. Hang on to that area, because for a long time that will be the base, interestingly enough, of the Chilean economy. And then as you go down, you get to what we call temperate. That's like our latitudes. And in fact, there are some important valleys, one in particular called the Central Valley, which is where most of the people of Chile live. They live in this valley between the coastal mountains and the Andes. You can see the Andes. It's gorgeous, by the way. I mean, you look out here, it's pretty, but is there a mountain? I mean, there's a mountain to the left, there's a mountain to the right. And that's where the capital is, Santiago, and also the chief port, Valparaiso, and they're there in the center, and that's where basically most of the people are concentrated, and the climate is temperate. So you can raise cows, you can grow wheat, whatever you want to do. And then there's the southern area. The southern area is heavily forested, generally with strange trees that don't grow up here. But if you cut them down and plant pine, there's no place in the world where pine will grow better. The pine isn't native to the area. That often happens. But you take the rubber tree from Brazil and it grows better what? In Indochina, so. Go figure. Pine trees grow very well there, and in fact, we will talk about forestry later on as one of the sources of wealth for Chile, but it's just forest, and it rains all the time. So they have what's called a rainforest. I mean, it really is. If you've seen it, it's like a thick rainforest, but it's cold, and in the wintertime, the rain turns to snow. So as you go farther down in Chile, it's colder and colder, and in fact, when you get way down, there's a very important little body of water. It's a strait that lies narrows between two very important bodies of water, the Atlantic and the Pacific. The first man to go through it was a Portuguese explorer by the name of Magellan. And so it's called the Straits of Magellan. And for centuries, if you wanted to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the only way you could do it was, if you're coming from Europe, you had to go all the way down to the tip of South America, go through the Straits of Magellan, which are not easy, and then come back up again into the Pacific. So a very important passage. It's like a natural Panama Canal, only it's far, far south from the Panama Canal, goes through the territory of Chile, and then you're ready, if you're going on your trip to Antarctica, you can embark here at Punta Arenas. All right. Now, who are the people there? Well, the people who started out there were the Amerindians. They're called the Araucanians. The most famous of the Araucanians are the Mapuche, and they lived in central Chile, but they were driven ultimately farther south by white invaders. Their presence there is interesting. It is generally assumed that they are part of this invasion that started up at the Bering Strait. You know, people crossed over from Siberia, that's how the Amerindians got here, crossed over from Siberia into Alaska, and then came down the what? The whole west coast of the Americas, and finally ended up here, be the last stop. However, there is an island off the coast of Chile, about 1,000 miles. It's called Easter Island. And Easter Island, which now belongs to Chile, has some very, very interesting things. It has these huge monolithic stone heads, hundreds of them, which implies that a people of some level of civilization reached there. And that led to a counter theory about the arrival of the Indians to the Americas. The counter theory is that there were two invasions, one from the north, from Siberia, and one from Polynesia, and they came over on rafts, do you understand, boats across the Pacific. They landed in Easter Island. They obviously had some level of what we would call civilization, and then they landed where? Here, and then they moved up. I can't confirm either. I don't know. I give you the idea. It's an interesting idea. But there were the Amerindians, and ultimately white people came from Europe, primarily Spanish. And they produced the present population of Chile, which is about 15.5 to 16 million people, who are in this thin country. Today, only 5% of the population has any connection in full-bloodedness to the Amerindians who were there. 95% are considered to be white, but if you go to Chile, which I've done, you notice a real distinction. In the upper classes, people are white, but in the lower classes, they have distinct Indian features. You'll see it very clearly. It is estimated that close to 70% of the population of Chile is mestizo, but don't tell them that. They don't want to be. Do you understand? They want to be white. So if you tell them, oh, you have wonderful Indian people, it's the end of the conversation. They wish to be white, and they wish to be classified as white, but anybody can see that there was a lot of hanky-panky going on around here. And so there is, and any anthropologist can confirm it, there is a mestizo population, and they tend to be at the bottom and not at the top. So now what's the story of this place? Well, first came the Amerindians. Actually, there were two groups of Amerindians. There were the Araucanian Indians, and then up in the desert area, in the northern part, there are Indians, or Amerindians, who are related to the ones in Bolivia and Peru. They're called the Aymara, and in fact, they were part of the Inca Empire when Pizarro arrived in the 16th century. They had no connection or relationship to the Amerindians farther to the south. They just ended up together because the Spanish created this administrative unit called Chile. Now, in the 16th century, in the 1530s in particular, there arrived the Spanish. The Spanish were looking for gold. They found some gold, but they mainly found silver, and now their most important possession in South America was Peru. Their capital was Lima, and what they established was, along the whole west coast of South America, something called the Viceroyalty of Peru, the capital of which was in Lima. Chile was part of Peru. It was simply the what? A leg. It wasn't economically very important. They found no silver there and they found no gold, so the Spanish weren't terribly interested. But some Spaniards, led by a man called Pedro de Valdivia, came down into the area, found the Central Valley, and started raising cows, raising cattle. So they're developed in the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries in this extension of Peru. They're developed a few little towns. One is called Santiago, which is now the capital of Chile, which has today over 5 million people. Metropolitan Santiago is bigger than Detroit. They created Concepcion, which is south of Santiago, and they created the port of Valparaiso, those three little places. The main economy was the Spaniards just went in, they enslaved the Indians, they used them as labor on their cattle farms. And since they couldn't export the meat, what they exported were hides. Got it? They took the hides, it was leather. The main export of Chile for 3 centuries was leather. And it was not a terribly important part of Peru. The most important part of Peru was in Bolivia, which was also part of Peru, because that's where the silver mines were. That's where the wealth was. The hides were a minor thing, so there it was, and nothing much happened, and the place is very mountainous anyway, and it's hard to find a port because the coastal mountains, if you see them, are like cliffs. You go down along the thing, they're like high cliffs, and every so often there'll be a little cove maybe you can get in to develop a port. Now, the Spanish had trouble with the Amerindians. The one group of them, the Mapuche, were fierce. And they fought the Spaniards so hard, and the Spaniards were so few in number, that they actually didn't conquer all of what today is Chile. All of southern Chile, almost all of southern Chile, was left in the hands of the Amerindians. The Spanish didn't think it was worth conquering, and the Indians actually were independent. It wasn't until the end of the 19th century that Chile finally sent its army down into the place to defeat the Indians and to take the area. Well, Chile is caught up in something it didn't start. It's called an independence movement. At the beginning of the 19th century, Napoleon invades Spain and takes it and puts his brother up as the king of Spain. He did that for all his relatives. He just divided up Europe and gave them to his relatives. And when he did that, the Spanish government ceased to exist. So the colonies now found themselves without a home government. And the British, who were fighting Napoleon, encouraged them to rebel, to declare themselves independent. So it happened one by one. Mexico, Central America, Colombia, I mean, they all declared themselves independent. And there arose a hero in Chile. He was half Spanish and half Irish. He is the great hero of Chile. Lots of Irish people, this connects this to the lecture last week. Lots of Irish people fled Ireland and went to Catholic countries to serve in Catholic armies. One of them was Mr. O'Higgins. So the George Washington of Chile is Bernardo O'Higgins. Right? It's like Percy Finkelstein. I mean, it's like, no, I mean, it doesn't go together. But that's it. That's history, all right? Bernardo O'Higgins. And in fact, Bernardo O'Higgins actually was the son of a Spanish viceroy of Peru who was Irish and who had married a Spanish woman. But like most of the white aristocracy in South America under the Spaniards, they didn't like the government in Spain anyway. So they rebelled, and he was the leader of the rebellion. He was initially defeated. He went across the mountains to Argentina. He found the man who was leading the rebellion in Argentina, whose name was San Martin, and he brought him over the Andes. And they defeated the Spaniards. What Spaniards? Well, after Napoleon was defeated, the Spaniards came back. They weren't very strong, and they sent an army into Peru in particular, and down into Chile, and O'Higgins and San Martin of Argentina whammoed them. And then they marched north, and they liberated Peru. And as they liberated Peru, they met Simón Bolívar coming down from Venezuela. Do you understand? It was a whole big thing. All of South America is now liberated from its Spanish overlords with the help of the British. So now a system sets in. So let me try to describe the system. There were not an overwhelming number of Spanish people there. There was a growing mestizo population. The Amerindians, the full Amerindians, had fled south, and there was a cattle business. So the country mainly consisted of people who owned the land who were white, who sold leather, got it? No, they exported leather, and they used cheap labor who served them almost as slaves, and they created a political system with a president and a constitution. The Constitution provided for a strong president and a weak Congress. But there was the establishment. So let me try to describe the establishment. It's the old establishment in Chile. The old establishment in Chile are the landowners. They are the descendants of the original whites who came to do leather. Okay. They brought the cows, and they owned all the land in large estates. And then attached to the landowners were two institutions, like every other country in Latin America. The army. One son got the land. One son became an officer in the army, and one son became a bishop. That's it. So that brings you the church, got it? The landowners, the army, and the church all together. That's called the establishment. They ran the Congress, and they chose the president. They did have an argument. So they created two political parties. One was called liberal, and one was called conservative. In almost every country in South America, you had a liberal party and a conservative party. What was the argument about? The argument was about the church. Many of the children of the landowners had been influenced by the ideas of the new age of science and the Enlightenment. They were Catholic, but they didn't want the church sticking its nose in every aspect of their life. And others were very devoutly Catholic. So if you were conservative, you were devoutly Catholic, and if you were liberal, you were so-so Catholic. That was the argument. Nobody was concerned about the underclass. Do you get it? The people who worked on the land, the mestizos, if you will, they were not concerned. The only argument they had was over that. And so it was a fairly stable regime. And then came the great confrontation. Chile had been part of a larger Spanish unit called the Viceroyalty of Peru, which included Peru, Bolivia, and Chile, which now split up into three separate Latin American countries. But in the 1870s, a war broke out between Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. Why? Well, the leather market wasn't entirely good. And in the desert in the north, a place nobody wanted to live in, they found three things. Guano. I don't know whether you know what guano is. Guano is bird excrement. Look, I didn't choose it. I was not, do you understand? They didn't ask me whether they should excavate it. But apparently it was worth a lot as fertilizer. And so there is guano. Then they found nitrates, which of course for fertilizer, I mean, that was very, very important. And then third, they found copper. So once they found guano, nitrates, and copper, all of a sudden Chile wanted this area, which actually had belonged to Bolivia, which gave Bolivia access to the sea. Today it's landlocked. So in 1879, the Chileans declared war on Bolivia and Peru. The famous War of the Pacific, whatever. From 1879 to 1883, I mean, this war went on, and they defeated both Bolivia and Peru. In fact, the Chilean army marched into Lima. And now the army asserts itself. Now the army is useful. Before it was simply useful to what? To take care of the second son of the landowners. Now it's useful. And now they've acquired a valuable addition that will change the economy of Chile and vastly improve it. Guano, nitrates, copper. They still got leather, right? And now they're growing a little wheat. Let me tell you about the wheat. When the gold rush breaks out in California, they need wheat. You try to get wheat from Ohio to San Francisco. Overland, impossible, no train, nothing. So what happened was that boats on their way to San Francisco would stop off in what? They had to come around, right? Stop off in Chile, pick up the grain, and head for San Francisco. So now, in addition to guano, nitrates, and copper, now in the Central Valley they're growing wheat. So this economy suddenly takes, in the 1880s, do you understand, a big jump. Well, so what they need is a creative government that will be able to manage all these new assets. The problem was the old establishment was not interested in spending money on railroads, ports, nothing. So in 1890 and 91, there came a crisis. The crisis was that the landowners, the establishment, turned against the president, who wanted to build ports, build railroads, whatever it was. His name was Balmaceda, and they overthrew him. Changed the Constitution, and instead of having a strong president, they now had a strong Congress. But the strong Congress wasn't interested in developing Chile the way it needed to be developed. So there was a period of confrontation until finally the Congress system, the establishment, is confronted by the army. There are leaders in the army who realize that something needs to be done to develop this economy, and in 1925 they conduct a coup. So here's a case of where the army what? Intervened to take over the government, and from 1925 on, the army will continue to intervene, and they now produce a kind of military dictator. His name is Ibáñez, and Ibáñez will be followed by the great hero of development. Hang on to the name. His name is very important. He's a member, he's part of the establishment, but he also represents another group that's come into Chile, so let me try to describe that group. One of the things that most South American countries tried to do was to whiten their population. The more whites, the safer the whites felt. So Brazil imported whites, right? Argentina certainly imported whites. So Chile began to import whites. The whites they imported were very important. One of them were the Germans. Large numbers of Germans came to Chile. That's in the 19th century, and since they were used to living in a cold climate, what the Chilean government then proceeded to do was to invade the south, defeat the Amerindians, take the land away from them, and give it to the Germans, who then moved in. There were many Italians. There were many British people who came to Chile. And so the population now gets whiter. Most of these people aren't part of the old establishment. They want a government that will develop this economy. So now there arises this man, his name is Alessandri. And Alessandri takes over and now creates a whole new system. Ports are built, railroads are made. Foreign investors are encouraged, do you understand, to come in. The old establishment benefits from it because they own all the land anyway and the real estate. But now there's a government that is friendly to business. Out of that will emerge what I call the political picture in Chile. On the right are what we call the National Party. The National Party represents the old establishment of the landowners who want to hang on to their own land, and in fact, they are represented also in the leadership of the army and the church. In the middle, you can call it the Center Party, it had various names, is the party that represents the new middle class. The class interested what? In business, in change. They want their government to develop the ports, the railroads, the infrastructure that is needed. And in fact, they now become the heart of the Chilean economy. In fact, initially, they are in favor of foreign investment. Ultimately, foreign investors will come and take over the copper mines because they have the money and the know-how in terms of how to extract the copper, how to distribute the copper, whatever it be. And initially, that seems to be acceptable. On the left, there will now emerge a group of parties that represent the mestizos, the workers. The workers now not only work on cattle ranches, and by the way, the Chileans also developed their own cowboy. In Argentina, he's called gaucho. In Chile, he's called a huasco. That's it. Does he look like a gaucho? Yes. Is he a gaucho? No, because he's not Argentinian. He's what? It's the same kind of a job. But so what happens is these are the people who do all the menial work. And in fact, expectations are rising all over the world. Workers are beginning to rise up and to strike at the end of the 19th century. Many of these people now leave the farms and go work in those terrible copper mines. You go work in the middle of the desert in a copper mine with 110 degrees, do you understand? Every day. So now you have a malcontent working class, and they now join parties like the Socialist Party or the Radical Party. They represent the left. So this is Chilean politics when you finally arrive by 1940 or 45. And it's all been tempered by the Depression, because the Depression obviously created massive unemployment in Chile. So you've got the right, the establishment, the army, and the leaders of the church. You've got the center, the middle class, the business class. And then you've got the left. These are the workers and children of the middle class who went to the university and became the intellectuals who try to organize the working class. So there are the three groups. So how do you create stability? Well, the way stability was created was that the center voted with the right. Do you understand? If the center and the right come together, then the left can't get any power. And in fact, that was to remain the system. A man like Alessandri, who became the darling, if you will, of both the right and the center, helped to develop the economy. And so it was the right and the center, and left out of everything was the left, which became, as time went on, more insistent because the population is increasing, and what doesn't exist in Chile is a welfare state. There are no pensions, there is no health care, and there is inadequate education. At one time, people in the lower classes would not have demanded it, but now they are. And they're striking, and they're demonstrating. All of it is complicated, you see, by the fact that one of the parties that now represents the workers is the Communist Party, but the Communist Party is now a party feared by the major power in the Western Hemisphere, that is the United States of America. Because the Cold War has started. And so, can the United States of America allow any Communist Party to take over a government in the Western Hemisphere? The answer is no. So the United States of America has a vested interest in keeping parties that are communist sympathizers or very far to the left out of power. And in fact, the United States of America is prepared to support military dictatorships which keep the what? The left out of power. In Chile, that wasn't necessary, because the right and the center were what? Together. And so you could have democratic government. But things were not really working, and then something happened. The people in the center realized the problem. And in fact, in 1964, a president was elected. His name was Eduardo Frei, who was the leader of the Center Party. The Center Party now has a name that showed up after World War II in Europe. It's called the Christian Democratic Party. And many people in the Center Party said, you know what, we're going to have a revolution in this country unless we do something to deal with the grievances of the poor. And so he runs. He receives the support of the right, but once he gets into power, he infuriates the right, because the right is supported by the landowners. And President Frei now says, look, we have a problem in this country. The land holdings are either too big or too small. The huge land ownings are not developed properly because the people have so much land they don't care. And the small land holdings are so small that you can't what? You can't do anything with it. What we need to do is to create medium-sized land holdings. So we're going to confiscate, with compensation, we're going to confiscate some of the land of the landowners, big landowners, and we are going to have land reform. We're going to give some of it to the mestizos, to the the working population, whatever, and we're going to do this in order to stimulate more production, more jobs. Well, he proceeded to do that. And what he proceeded to do was to anger the people on the right. So now the election is 1970. During the 1960s, a phenomenon had arisen in South America that terrified the Americans. The phenomenon is called Fidel Castro. A Latin American who was a communist had successfully conducted a revolution and established a communist government only a few miles from Miami. So the Americans now are what? Scared for a very simple reason. Castro's agenda is not simply to settle for Cuba. Castro sees Cuba as a base of operations for encouraging revolution all over Latin America. In fact, Che Guevara in 1965 leaves Cuba and goes to Bolivia, where he gets killed in the process. Bolivia's next door to Chile. So when the presidential election comes in 1970, it's a very tense one. Normally, you would expect the right and the center to be together against the left, and they would win. But in this election, the right and the center split. Instead of 2 candidates, there are 3. There's a candidate for the right, the establishment. There's now the candidate for the center, who is the incumbent, right? President Frey. And on the left, a man shows up by the name of Salvador Allende. Had the right and the center stuck together, he would never have come to power. And the rule is that the person who gets the majority doesn't have to be not the majority, the person who gets the plurality, the greatest number of votes, what? Wins. So the election comes, and the Americans are watching this election very carefully, because in Chile, 2 parties come together that historically had split. In Europe, the socialists and communists hated each other. The communists were pro-Soviet and the socialists were pro-American. But in Chile, the socialists and the communists went together, and one of the reasons, and this is one of the bizarre things people don't realize, the Communist Party was more conservative than the Socialist Party in Cuba. In Chile. It was more pragmatic. They realized that you couldn't do everything at once. But the idealists like Allende, who were in charge of the Socialist Party, wanted to have a what? A social revolution, and they were united in a popular front. And they ran. And Allende wins 36% of the vote. Well, is that a majority? No. And now the courts have to agree to his confirmation as the president of Chile, and the army has to agree. The leader of the army is a man called Schneider, influence of German. Got a lot of O'Higgins and Schneiders here. This country is loaded with Irish names and with German names, all right? So General Schneider is in charge, and Schneider, who's a right-winger, is, however, what I would call a noble right-winger. He says, the law is the law is the law. If he won it, what? Then he gets it. So then something happens that will put Allende in power. It's not clear that the army will allow Allende to take power with 36% of the vote. They assassinate Schneider. They kill the leader of the army. And everybody now is so mortified that it creates a kind of wellspring of support for Allende. It was a big mistake on the army's part. And Allende is now swept into power with 36% of the vote. He has now in opposition the right and the center, but he's caught up in what we call Castro. In fact, he invites Castro to Santiago, and the CIA in Washington is making notes. Castro has come to Santiago, and he's given a big speech, and the whole thing supporting the regime. All that Washington sees is red. And Allende doesn't help it. Allende says, what we're going to do is take all the land away from the big landowners. Can't have more than 200 acres. Okay, thank you. So now the whole right, I got it, the whole right with the army and part of the church, the leaders of the church, opposed. Then he says, what we're going to do is nationalize all the businesses. The major businesses, copper, nitrates, you tell me what it is. So he does. The major owners of the copper mines is Anaconda, which is an American corporation. So, I mean, take it away. Well, the middle class now gets what? Nervous. If you're beginning to nationalize this, the next thing you're going to do is what? Nationalize small businesses. And then, in response to the nationalization without compensation, Allende says to Anaconda, I'm giving you no money because you have plundered this country and taken your profits out of it. By the way, the Communist Party counseled him not to do that. But he was the leader of the Socialist Party, which in this case was more radical. More radical than because the communists had a little pragmatic. I mean, what are you doing? As a result, a boycott is established, which almost destroys the Chilean economy. That is, nobody will buy Chilean copper. Well, copper is what? The mainstay of the economy, and now they won't buy anything from Chile. So now the economy collapses. As the economy collapses, there's no money for the welfare state, which Allende has ordered. So the peasants now, on their own, go around seizing land, and workers go around seizing factories. Doesn't do much good because a factory that can't sell its products is what? It's not going anywhere. But there's all this enthusiasm, and I must tell you that thousands and thousands of young radical intellectuals from all over the world, remember the 60s were still around, go down to Chile to be with the revolution. Now, the army is getting very disturbed. Some of them say we should have had that coup. Regardless of our mistake with Schneider, do you understand? We should have had that coup. Allende's worried because he can see that the army is plotting. So he takes a move that he thinks will help. He decides to take people from the army into his government. So first of all, he takes a general by the name of
My son Daku was riding a motorcycle when he was struck by a car. I had spoken to him previously about donating his organs, and it made it so much easier for me to make the decision. I knew that this is something that he wanted. I didn't have to feel guilty about making the decisions, doing something that he may not have wanted. Every day I tell people, talk it over. You must let people know what you want.
But the army, he's too liberal. So they remove him and they replace him a few months before the coup by this man called Pinochet. Pinochet was born in Valparaiso. He comes from an aspiring, social climbing, middle-class family. I never deplore that, since I grew up in the middle class and we're all social climbers. It's okay. No, it's okay. Now, we wanted to get out of Detroit to Birmingham. So, but it was, and he had a very domineering mother, and he was enormously egotistical, very vain, and his whole manner was authoritarian when dealing with underlings. People did say, was one of the things they used to say about Pinochet, he was kind to women and animals, and children. So, do you understand? Whatever that means. He now becomes the Minister of Defense in Allende's government, and Allende, in 1973, wanted to hold a plebiscite, to have the people vote in support of what he was doing. And he wanted to hold it on September the 10th. And Pinochet said, no, hold it on September the 12th. On September the 11th, they showed up at the presidential palace and they kill him and the whole thing, and they take over the government. Now, when they take over the government, the economy is in shambles. Now, who is to blame? Well, you can say it's those Americans. First of all, the American CIA conspired with Pinochet to overthrow this man who was democratically elected, the president of Chile, and they imposed sanctions, couldn't sell anything. The other side said he wasn't elected by a majority of the people at all. He slipped in because there were there were three candidates, and he got the largest of the three. And two, he is an incredibly dumb and rotten manager. Got the other side? I mean, give you both sides. So, didn't make any difference. Allende is dead, and with him 3,000 of his followers murdered. And Pinochet is in charge. So the first thing he does Pinochet does, it's the purge. You locate for me every radical, every socialist, do you understand, and every communist in this country, and do you understand? I want them interrogated. In fact, Pinochet is rumored to have said, no flower flutters in this country without my knowing it. Now, that's a little egotistical. I mean, no flower flutters in this country without my knowing it. So now what is established is this institution called DINA, which is like the KGB. It's an intelligence unit, do you understand, that is supposed to ferret out the enemy. The enemy are all those people who are obviously communist sympathizers. And Henry Kissinger, back up in the United States of America, who is moving from National Security Advisor to Secretary of State, supports the coup. And in fact, that's right, we have to ferret out the what? The commies. So first comes the purge. But after the purge is over, by the way, I do want to tell you how terrifying things were. I was in Chile in 1976. I knew there had been the coup, and I knew there was Pinochet, and I had gone to Buenos Aires for the first time, where they had just had a coup. They'd overthrown Isabel Perón. You know, my travel agent didn't tell me I was going to get two coups. No, in one trip. I mean, you know, is that a boon? I don't know. So I came from Buenos Aires, which was frightening, and I landed in Santiago, which was equally frightening. People were afraid to talk. People would close doors. and we would sit in rooms, and I thought, well, why are you closing the windows, the door, whatever? I mean, it was frightening. On the other hand, many of the people I met were happy about the change. They were in the middle class. I didn't spend my time with the mestizos, right? They were in the middle class. I mean, they were of mixed descent. Some were Spanish, some were Irish, some were French, some were Jewish, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. And they thought it was pretty good. This crazy man who was ruining the economy had been overthrown. But you could feel the repression, and the one interesting thing was, it was a surprise, one of the institutions that told Pinochet he had gone too far was the church. The church had been historically part of what we call the establishment. But Vatican Council II had already occurred, and now there were people in the church who denounced Pinochet and provided shelter for families and people who were being arrested and harassed by the government. I went to the cathedral. The cardinal that time was named Silva, and he was known as an arch-conservative, and he turned out to be this man who told Pinochet off. The only place in all of Chile where you could go and get any help, if your child had disappeared or whatever else it was, you went to the cathedral. And there was a little office there. And I remember that because people often try to put institutions into what we call, good or bad categories. That doesn't excuse the role of the leaders of the church who supported the repression. It does, by the way, say the church was clearly divided. But what everybody was asking was, fine, what about the economy? So now they came. The Chicago boys, that's what they're called. The Chicago boys, these are Chileans who had gone to America, and many people went to the United States to study, right? They had gone to the University of Chicago, they had found Milton Friedman. And they studied with Milton Friedman, and Milton Friedman said, the only way an economy can work is get the government out of the economy. And encourage investment. It doesn't make any difference where it comes from. And as for the welfare state, if you want to bankrupt a rising economy, that's the way you'll do it. Got the principles? No. So that's what he did. The first thing he did, because the inflation under Allende was terrible, the currency was worthless. People told me stories. I mean, you couldn't buy anything. It was just, the currency was absolutely worthless. Was to drain out the inflation. So for 4 years, Chile went through what we call the recovery, like a man recovering from drugs. They deliberately cut the budget, and they deliberately shrank or removed whatever welfare there was. And they devalued the currency in order to encourage exports. Within 4 years, the inflation was gone. Was there human suffering? Yes. Do you understand? I mean, it was like an iron fist. And then they said to foreign investors, welcome. So they sold the copper mines ultimately. By the way, Pinochet hung on to them for a long time. They were nationalized, he hung on to the copper mines. But the other things, the factories, everything was now privatized. 160 major industries in Chile were sold to foreign investors, bringing in what? Money, and now creating jobs. And by 1981, Chile was growing the economy by 6% a year. It had become the fastest growing economy in the fastest growing economy in Latin America. So, the economic miracle takes place. And this now raises the question: do you hate or not hate Pinochet? On the one hand, he what? He ruthlessly killed 3,000 people. He overthrew the government. On the other hand, an economy that had never fully recovered since the Depression was on its way up. What's more important, a political value, an economic? Got this whole thing? So, in 1988, Pinochet holds his election, right? He said he was going to do that. And he thought he would be overwhelmingly reelected. Wrong. People didn't like the repression. They liked the growing economy, but they didn't like the repression, and they repudiate him. But he's already made provision for himself. He will stay in charge of the army. And now the new government that comes to power is a coalition, not of the center-right, but of the center-left. Oh. The center party is the Christian Democratic Party. The left party is called the Socialist Party. Oh. So now they have to make a choice. Do they go back, the left, to their old principles, which would be to repudiate the economic decisions made by Pinochet? Or, since the economy seems to be rolling along, do they accept it? It's like Tony Blair. He's a socialist. Does he negate everything that Maggie Thatcher did, or does he dress up Maggie Thatcher to look like Tony Blair? Do you remember what Tony Blair did? He dressed himself up like Maggie Thatcher, and he called Maggie Thatcher socialism. Well, that's what Deng Xiaoping did in China. He called communism capitalism. I mean, he called capitalism communism. So, you got the dilemma? If you want to find out what the choice was, come back in 5 minutes and I will explain. Let me pick up the question, the choice. I do want to say that in terms of the intellectuals in Chile, most of them were supportive of the left. Now that's not strange, but that certainly was true. There are two figures ultimately who were to be recognized with Nobel Prizes. One is a woman, Gabriela Mistral, and the other, perhaps more famous, was the poet Pablo Neruda. And Neruda was a member of the Communist Party, but as I pointed out to you, the Communist Party in Chile was to the right of the radical socialists to some degree. And in fact, he died about the same time as the coup. He was overwhelmingly distressed by what happened. In fact, they entered his house and they rifled through things. And some people claim that he was so distressed that it affected his health and he quickly or ultimately died. But Neruda is one of my favorite poets. Not a political poet. I mean, his poetry about love and human relations and nature it's absolutely exquisite. So this country called Chile produced some really significant intellectuals along the way. Most of them were identified with the left. So Neruda was not what I would call a person much loved by the Pinochet regime at all. But here is the choice. Now, when the choice is made, Pinochet hasn't completely left the scene. He's still the commander-in-chief of the army. But the government that now comes to power in 1989, the government that comes to power in Chile is a center-left government. It has the party of the old middle class and the socialists. The representative of the middle party, the center party, is the president. His name is Allende. These names, by the way, you can already hear the British, right? Allende, I mean, you can already hear the English there. So there are lots of mixes here in Chile, and he makes certain choices. All right, so the coalition makes the choice. The first, because they have to work with Pinochet, and it's the price for Pinochet to surrender his power. He had thought he was going to win, but he had made provision just in case he didn't. Now, what is interesting is Fidel Castro never arranged for an election. So the people who defend Pinochet say, well, was he a rotten, ruthless dictator? Yes. But he did arrange for an election. The reason why he thought he would win, he thought that people would forget the repression and remember the good economy. No, do you understand? The good economy that had emerged. But they were sick and tired of his government. He made one very big mistake. He was so egotistical. He never created a political party to support his point of view. There was the old conservative or national party, but it wasn't a party he necessarily controlled, and the thought that he would train a successor, I mean, he's already in his mid-70s, the thought that he would train a successor never entered his mind. But he still was in charge of the army, and that was formidable. So one of the first things they decided was to accept an amnesty. Let bygones be bygones. They did that partially in Argentina, when in the early 1980s the junta was overthrown. Don't rile up the army, they will conduct a what? Another coup. Let's play it what? Let's play it easy. They did have one man put on trial and convicted. His name is Corrientes, and he was the man in charge of that intelligence unit, DINA, that went out and arrested people and killed them and whatever. His case was so notorious that he was ultimately put on trial. But basically, most of the people involved in the repression went free. The second was, now pouring back into Chile are all these people who want justice. They are the people who fled. The relatives, the friends, the intellectual supporters, the political allies of Allende. Now they're coming back from the States, from Europe, from wherever. They come back to Chile. They return, and of course, they now constitute a very important faction. This amnesty is to them a moral, got it? It's a moral travesty. The people who perpetrated these crimes must be arrested. They must be tried and hopefully convicted. But now came the Tony Blair. This center-left party decided to continue the economic program of Pinochet. They had become the fastest growing country in Latin America. Why would you shoot? Do you understand? This functioning economy dead. Would you go back to Allende's program? So they made that decision, and quite frankly, there was popular support for it. In fact, the leader of the Socialist Party said, "We made mistakes. We made mistakes. We should not have been overthrown, and these people obviously should not have been killed, but we made what? We made mistakes." So the economy doesn't change. You have Milton Friedman under socialists, just as you have Maggie Thatcher under Labour in England. So if you want to talk about the success of Thatcher and Reagan, that's the choice that was made. So Pinochet, although he wasn't president anymore, dictator. By the way, I do want to tell you something about O'Higgins, which relates to an egotistical dictator. O'Higgins was very dictatorial, and his title, by the way, was director. That was the title he took for himself. They didn't have president yet or whatever. And when he was kicked out of office in 1823 because he was just too dictatorial, he had a parrot. And the parrot was trained to always say, "Director, director, director, director." No, I don't know whether Pinochet had a parrot, whatever it was, but I think it's quite wonderful. So, so there's Pinochet, and he can crow. I mean, so, look, the whole issue was over economic policy. And now they have endorsed my policy. So they can hate me all they want. In the end, I'm vindicated. Do you understand? I'm vindicated. Whatever Allende was doing was driving this economy into the ground. Whatever I did, 6% growth. All right? It's not a weak argument. And in fact, what has happened from 1989 on until the present is that the decisions of Pinochet and his government for the economy have been preserved. In fact, they've been extended. Pinochet kept the copper company under government ownership. The socialists and the Center Party have now sold it to a consortium of Americans and British and Japanese. And in 1994, Aylwin is replaced by Eduardo Frei, who was, remember, he was the president before the coup, and who was a Christian Democrat. And then in 2000, the man who runs on the center-left coalition is a man called Lagos. Lagos is the leader of the Socialist Party. Allende was going to send him as his ambassador to Moscow. He had fled in exile and then returned. And Lagos, he has endorsed the Pinochet economic policy, which is, by the way, Milton Friedman, which could make Maggie Thatcher look a little bit like a communist. No. That's the truth. So what is this economic miracle? What is it? What's happened? Well, first of all, they got lots of foreign money to come into the country by saying, enough of this nationalism. We want this economy to work. So whoever's got money and wants to put money into this economy, hello, show up. And in fact, they did show up. They bought the what? They bought the copper mines. Nitrates, by the way, were wrecked by the Germans. The Germans found a way of doing artificial nitrates. I mean, you know, not the naturals thing. So we're now into all these artificial fertilizers and whatever else it is. So that sort of, and I think they ran out of guano or they just gave up on it, because I would have abandoned guano immediately. I mean, when I found out what guano was when I went to Chile, I said, don't talk to me about it. All right. Now they're into forestry. The whole southern part of Chile is the best place in the world to grow good pine. All you have to do is cut down the trees that are there and plant pines. The pines, you know, it rains, the pines will shoot up just like this. So now they're busy cutting down all the trees. And then they plant pines, which they then in turn cut down, and then they what? Replant the whole thing. Now, environmentalists are going out of their mind. Is it good for business? Yes. Do most of the people in Chile care about the old trees? No. Is the place forested? Yes. Now it's forested with pines. And they're buying up land after land after land. And the whole thing. Forestry. Shipping out the wood. Fish. Oh, I mean, look how thin it is along the shore. Do you know how much seafood there is around here? So now Chile has become one of the major farmers of salmon. Now we're all told to make a distinction between wild salmon that is free to spawn, whatever, and imprisoned salmon. I got to get this from environmental. Imprisoned salmon. Frankly, I can't taste the difference. People tell me they can taste it, so I generally eat imprisoned salmon. I don't. Do I feel guilty? Yes, it's like imprisoned chickens. I mean, I know they're caught up in the coop, but I mean, I just want a little chickens. I mean, so I eat imprisoned chickens and I eat imprisoned salmon. I don't know. I'm confessing to you. Do you understand? One of the biggest places where they have money to buy imprisoned salmon is Japan. So Chile is the major supplier. It isn't the United States. She ships it all over the Pacific area. Fish. And in fact, while the fishing resources up in the northern Atlantic have been depleted, the fishing resources down here, I cannot tell you, every fish looking for a place to land heads for the South Pacific there, the Southwest Pacific, or the Southeast Pacific. All right, so the next is fruit. They've now changed the wheat. There's too much wheat selling around the world, so they stop wheat and stop the cows. Grow cherries, apples, kiwi. No. The blackberries. Oh, I mean, I eat Chilean produce. You're always buying Chilean. And in fact, in the wintertime when you can't get it here, they what? They ship it. It's summer down there. They're shipping it all over, not just to the United States, to Europe, everywhere. And then they didn't have them before. Vineyards. They discovered this country's wonderful. If they have like mountains, do you understand? And you plant the vineyards on the side of the mountain, the next thing you get terrific grapes. And from those grapes you get terrific wine. So now every other bottle of wine that I taste in a restaurant comes from Chile. The French and Italians don't know what to do. Chile is just behind France and Italy in terms of providers of wine for the American table. Now, along the way, they had to deal with the issue of welfare. They continued Pinochet's program. If it sounds a little bit like George Bush Jr., it's not a coincidence. Pinochet says this economy can't get off the ground, and Milton Friedman said, if we have very high welfare costs. So what we're going to do is, since the welfare system collapsed anyway, we're going to start from scratch. From now on, people will pay for their own welfare starting young. So we will give them some money, but most of it will come from them. Old people who have state pensions, they'll get them. Young people, said Pinochet, you will have a private account administered by the state, and you will be, do you understand, compelled to put money into that account. Now, if you start with private accounts when you're 19, by the time you are 65, you might have some money. And in fact, that's the system in Chile. The system we're arguing about here has already been instituted in Chile. It's the only country in the world. Healthcare, same thing. And in fact, money is taken out of whatever you earn, and it goes to healthcare. I mean, there are negotiations sometimes with the corporation or the business, I mean, sharing, whatever it is. But the burden now of the provision is placed on the individual. It's a total transformation, and it's endorsed by a center socialist government. Got this thing? They didn't even change that. You would think that would be the first thing they would change. In fact, their economy is so good, they hosted a conference for the Japanese, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Australians, the New Zealanders, called the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference. Hosted it in Santiago. Chile is now one of the big, got it? Big-time economic powers. I mean, will wonders never cease? Lagos, you're a socialist. I mean, what are you doing with this, with this agenda? Well, there are challenges. First of all, it's not clear that for poor people, they will be able to accumulate the savings that will be able to take care of them in the end. I mean, there are statements that for many of the poor people, their accounts are insufficient, and that they will end up, or else they have already ended up with insufficient money. So that's one of the issues, you know, with this private account business. The second is the Chilean economy is not based on manufacturing. It's based on providing primary resources. Agricultural goods and metals, do you understand? Whatever it be. And that makes an economy very vulnerable. And lumber, not finished products. Therefore, the prices of these products on the world market go up and down, and therefore makes the economy vulnerable. Third, following Milton Friedman, there is no national administration of the economy. There's nobody saying, now wait a minute. We have to sell this business, but we ought to keep this business. It's all open. Any foreign investor can come in and buy what? Anything. And see, in China, they've got what we call national management. In Japan, for a long while, they had national management. In America, we don't have it, which means that any American corporation can, at any given time, decide to move his entire operation outside the United States of America, leading to what? Massive American unemployment, whatever it is. One of the challenges is that the people are no longer interested in politics. In 1973, if you walked into a cafe in Santiago, they start talking politics. Now, if you walk into a cafe, they talk about what they're going to buy at the shopping center. Does it sound? No. The whole public interest has shifted from politics, it's like a non-apolitical environment, to consumerism. I mean, one of the things I was told about Chile is that even poor people are so caught up in consumerism. They go to the malls, they can't afford to buy anything, but they'll take a little wagon or a truck or whatever, and then they'll put things in it. And they'll go and they'll meet friends or whatever, and it looks as though they're buying, and then when they get to the counter, they leave everything and they walk, or they take one item and they walk out. So everybody will think they're, will think they're a consumer. I think that's wonderful. I mean, it's also tragic to say the least. All right. The other thing are the Amerindians. The Mapuche Indians have been driven down into the forest. Nobody wanted to cut anything down. Now they what? They're cutting down their homeland. And the other thing is justice. When will these people who committed these crimes be brought to justice, including General Pinochet himself? Recently, one of the courts in Chile said that he was okay, you could put him on trial. By the time they get him to trial, I want you to know, he really won't know. He will not, he's in his mid-80s, he will not know where he is. So what is the future? Well, the future is Pinochet, who is a rotten person, no doubt, ruthless dictator, has permanently changed the Chilean economy to the point where his successors, who say they hate him, will not change it. Why will you change something that works? Okay? The second is that Chile is the most extreme example now in the world of what is called a neoliberal economy. Now, the word liberal historically meant free. It means a liberal economy, as opposed to a socialist economy, is an economy in which the government does not intervene at all. In a conservative economy, historically, it always intervened, because in the Middle Ages, the government told you what you could buy, what you could eat, how you should behave, the whole thing. All right. So it's Milton Friedman turned into a reality. The United States of America isn't. There's no country in Europe that is. Chile. So if anybody wants to go find a place where the removal of the government from the economy has been, do you understand, most fully realized, it's Chile. The next is that Chile is now the most prosperous country in Latin America. 6% growth on a continuous basis, recognized by major economic powers as significant, now invited to be a member of NAFTA, the whole thing, and the United States of America's strongest ally. I mean, of all the allies that America has in Latin America, Chile is the strongest. If you were to ask Bush, who is the strongest, who's our best ally in Latin America, it is Chile. And last, Chile is out of step with where these other countries are going. If you look at Venezuela or Brazil or whatever, or Argentina, they have elected presidents who are saying, look, we need national management. Yes, we want foreign investment, but yes, we need better welfare, the whole thing. I mean, Chile is totally out of step with what else is going on in Latin America. It is that's the only word for it, a phenomenon. So let me conclude by saying, do I like Pinochet? No. I would like to see him behind bars. But did his government fundamentally change the Chilean economy, which now seems to be working? The answer is yes. So, while I hate Pinochet, I don't hate an economy that works. I mean, it has its problems, do you understand? But at 6% growth rate, it's going up. It's the most successful country in all of Latin America, and all I can say is, history is bizarre. You can quote me on that. Thank you all very, very much. The frustrations has to do with Russia. They just had a terrorist incident in Russia. In fact, that terrorist incident most likely will help Bush in the election, because it reminds people that we live in a world of terrorists who shoot children. And if that's the case, what it reinforces is the connection not between Russia and France, but the connection between Russia and the United States, who seem to be engaged in the same war. So for Chirac to get the ear of Putin now is harder, because Putin shares a common agenda with the Bush government. What are the implications of it all? Well, let me just say to you, and I said this last week, the United States of America go it alone. We are the most powerful nation in the world, but we are not strong enough to maintain law and order in the world, which we need for the sake of the global economy. We are not strong enough to do it on our own. We need allies. Our historic allies who are closest to us culturally are the Europeans. So we need England, we need France, we need Germany, we need them. And they need us. Russia needs us. We need Russia. And Europe is too amorphous yet. I mean, there is no strong centralized government to develop a European policy, all right? So the alliance is necessary. The question is how to implement it. Now, speaking about the French specifically, let me just say, People in the French government, including Chirac, know that something needs to be done to repair things. Because the French going off on their own with a German government that's unstable, not going anywhere. But you see, they have so much pride invested in the ritual of the anti-Americanism is sometimes hard to stop. Now, the man who was the foreign minister during the time of the major provocation, Villepin, is out. Chirac has a rival. He's an interesting man. It's a sign of the change in France. France has had thousands and thousands of immigrants. Most of them who were European adapted themselves to French culture. After 1956 in particular, there were thousands of Hungarians who came to France after the crushing of the rebellion in Hungary. When there were Hungarians who came before, there is a man called Nicolas Sarkozy. It's an interesting name for a French politician. He's of Hungarian origin. And he's the Minister of Interior, which is a very important job because it's the law and order, it's the law and order position in France. And he's very, very ambitious. He wants Chirac's job. And Chirac now is very vulnerable. The economy isn't working. His government has been plagued with scandal for the last 10 years. He lost the regional elections. And he's getting older. And this young, ambitious man wants the power. I think Sarkozy has a slightly different vision from Chirac. I mean, you have to be a very staunch French patriot. Do you know that most French people, when they go on vacations, go on vacation in France? English people don't do that. You find them all naked in southern Spain and in the Balearics and in Crete. They don't do that. Germans don't do that. They're all naked in Yugoslavia. They're all, France, no. So you have to be patriotic in some way. What I'm hoping for, and I think it may happen, is that Chirac will ultimately be replaced. And he most likely will be replaced by the figure of Sarkozy, who could emerge initially as the prime minister and then run in the next presidential election. And it would be a fresh face and a new person and an awareness that the reconciliation needs to be established, which means the compromise is both places. If the French compromise, we have to too. Which means we will never restore an alliance with either Germany or France to the place where it belongs unless we're willing to deal with them, at least on the surface, as equals. If all we want to do is issue orders from Washington and say, you're either with us or against us, that's not going to work. So my source of optimism is this tough minister of the Interior. His name is Sarkozy. Keep your eye on him. It may be the case that he could be the vehicle for some level of reconciliation. And in the interim, when you go to the restaurant, don't order freedom fries. Defy the establishment. Ask for French fries. Thank you all very, very much.